Ponder trained for weeks at the outpost. It was much more book learning than they expected, especially from someone like Feldspar. Life at the lunar outpost was easy going, aside from the studies. Feldspar and Chuck welcomed them into their lives with no complaint. Most of the evenings were spent around the campfire, listening to Feldspar's stories and experimenting with their very different musical instruments. Ponder's fiddle and Feldspar's harmonica clashed at first, but they got the hang of playing together. Whenever she got the chance, Chuck would rope Ponder into playing games with cards and wooden pieces. Her favorite was an unfamiliar triangular game of checkers. Apparently it was a gift from Gabbro. It was very old, and maybe it should be in the museum, but after all, a game is meant to be played. Now teacher and student were once again using the inside of the new spacecraft as a classroom. Even though they weren't going anywhere, they were both wearing their spacesuits. That was a peculiar habit of Feldspar and Gaussen. Feldspar said it was because they were pilots, and the other travelers were astronauts. An astronaut puts on their suit when they leave the ship, because they're here to spacewalk. A pilot puts on their suit when they get in the ship, because they're here to fly. Thankfully, they didn't have to put on their helmets, so they could talk to each other easier and not waste pressurized oxygen. They had already been there an hour, reviewing the instrument panel in the cockpit. Ponder memorized every gauge and toggle, and recited the pre-flight checklist. This time, Ponder was in the pilot's seat, while Feldspar asked questions and pointed to things from the passenger seat. Unlike previous days, Ponder was pretty comfortable with the information, and was able to answer most of their teacher's questions. They moved on to a pop quiz on damage control. If you're in a dangerous position and your ship is damaged, what should you do? Feldspar asked. Fly the ship to empty space or a safe landing site, then get out and repair. Good. These systems are here to help you. None of them are worth risking your life over. Feldspar emphasized that with a finger pointed at Ponder's chest. What's the one exception? The reactor. Don't move an inch until I fix it. That's right. The veteran pilot gave a satisfied nod. What are the 4 R's of reactor repair? Release excess pressure into space, reseal any leaks, restart the reactor. Ponder counted the steps off with their 3 fingers and their thumb. Okay, one more. Ponder touched their chin as they thought. Oh, if that don't work, run for your life. And if you see electricity arcing off anything connected to the reactor, skip the other steps and bail out. You either move fast, they repeated once again, giving Ponder a finger gun, or die unpleasantly, the 2 spacefarers said together. Feldspar looked him in all 4 eyes a moment. You're really getting this, huh? Ponder wasn't sure what to say. They both looked over all the buttons and scopes in front of them. They could do more quizzes. They could run through more test sequences. Out of nowhere, Feldspar asked, You want to go? They were doing it. They were flying. They couldn't believe it was finally time. Or maybe too soon, but still. Ponder had to check himself to make sure this was really happening. The engines roared and shook. They were blasting off again. But Ponder was at the controls. They gripped the control stick tightly, as if it would run off on its own. There seemed to be twice as many gauges and switches now that the nerves kicked in. Ponder didn't know which one to look at. What if they pushed the wrong button? Ease off on the throttle, Feldspar coached, partly muffled by their helmet. They didn't seem worried at all. Their mentor's steady presence helped Ponder calm down. Throttle to neutral. Ponder knew how to do that. The nascent atmosphere of the little moon was fading from view, leaving only stars. They were in space now. What's your speed? The throttle was at 0, but the ship was still traveling on momentum. They searched the instruments. 400 meters per second, Ponder reported. That don't mean anything, Feldspar shot back. What's your speed? Huh? Vector. 400 meters in relation to what? The old pilot hinted. The Addle Rock. Going toward or away from it? Feldspar asked stubbornly. It clicked for Ponder. Minus 400 meters per second from Addle Rock. Good. Forget about plain old speed. That's useless. Closing speed is what you have to worry about. Are we going fast if we want to keep up with the interloper? They invented. Ponder looked at the solar compass and tried to make sense of the little dots moving around on it. They gently nudged the stick sideways, pivoting. It should be passing the hollow right about now, but what direction were they facing anyways? Feldspar leaned in for some helpful coaching. Not that way. A little more. Don't be shy. They finally angled down after sweeping the view through empty space for a while. With the ship's sensors pointed the right way, the computer could see the haunted comet. Now the screen showed the target escaping them at high speed. Too slow. Are we going fast if we were landed on Brittle Hollow right now? Now that the scopes were already pointed in that direction, it wasn't hard to indicate Ponder's home planet on the computer. In cosmic terms, they were traveling surprisingly close to its orbital speed, with barely 200 meters per second difference. A little too fast. A little? If we make contact with the surface at 213 meters per second, it'll crush us like a boot on a bark bug. Ponder tried to receive the lesson without getting intimidated. You must do this kind of math pretty quick. Feldspar shrugged off the accusation of intelligence. I leave all the complicated math to Slate and Hornfels. I just add and subtract. How fast am I going toward the destination, plus how fast it's coming at me? The closer you are to something, the smaller your relative velocity should be. By the time you're close enough to touch something, that number should be damn near 0. The veteran ended with a sharply serious note. Right. Feldspar watched them a moment until they decided that the lesson had properly sunk in. Now, turn this around and stop moving away from Addle Rock. I'm not ready to turn you loose on the solar system. Let's get a couple orbits under your belt. Those orbits were a joy for Ponder. Yes, maybe it was a little sloppy, but they were flying. Their movements were a little jerky at first, but the new pilot was already starting to get the hang of it by the end. Yes, they spun off into empty space a little bit, trying to find the right direction. But what's the harm? A little space can't hurt you. The view of Timber Hearth and the Addle Rock from up here was worth it by itself. All that flying, and Ponder didn't even crash once. Yet. All too soon, they were landing. Safely back to base, right? But now they weren't flying. They were falling. Falling toward solid rock. Ponder tensed up. Things started to rattle again in the thin air. The retro rockets were firing, but they were still going down fast. Every fiber of their being was focused on keeping the ship steady. The ship was oriented correctly. They could swear it. They were coming down right over the Addlewoods, with the outpost directly beneath them. The ship kept drifting sideways away from that safe clearing in the trees. They didn't touch the sideways thrust, so what was the problem? Surely it wasn't wind. Moon's moving too, kid. What? Ponder tried to visualize the orbit and spin of the Addle Rock itself, but it was too overwhelming. Forget it. Just give those maneuvering thrusters a nudge. Keep your eye on the landing camera. Ponder corrected the slide, and they were lined up on the landing zone again. It was close. Too close. You're going too fast. Ponder slammed the throttle. trying to shrink the closing speed before it was too late. They lurched and had a strange sensation of bobbing upward. The powerful thrusters brought the ship to a halt in the air, and they started to rise again. "That's too much. Ease off a little," Feldspar prompted. Ponder tried to set the thrust back down to the right amount. They quickly scanned up to make sure they wouldn't come down on top of the house or the other ship. "Just a little." Ponder added a little more oomph again, but they were already close to the ground. There was dust everywhere. They lost perspective. Were they tipping forward? Feldspar hollered, "What are you?" Smash! Ponder felt like they just got hit by a planet. They held up their hands, still in the gloves of their spacesuit. They were alive, not dead, and it didn't feel like anything was broken. Feldspar felt the same way, judging by the growling groan. They sounded more annoyed than hurt. Their harnesses just saved them from getting injured. The bottom of the cockpit's rounded window was buried in dirt, and the rest was coated with white dust. They were angled forward awkwardly and would have slid out of their seats if they weren't strapped in. The dash panel buzzed angrily. What was damaged? Ponder glanced at the status monitor to make sure they didn't break anything that could explode. Phew! A blurry form ran up to the window. Tentacle hands wiped the moon dust off of a face-sized patch of glass. Chuck's eyes were wide with worry. She raised her voice so they could hear her on the inside. "Dad, Ponder, you okay?" Ponder stuffed their embarrassment and waved hello. Feldspar gave a thumbs up. Not a happy thumbs up, just a "we're fine" thumbs up. Chuck laughed with relief and shook her head. They climbed down through the hatch on the other side of the ship. Ponder had to stoop lower this time to get out from under it. The front landing strut had been crushed under the metal fuselage, and broken wooden beams poked out from the new crater. As the dust settled, the pilots removed their helmets. Chuck met him with a mixture of concern and amusement. "I thought you were just learning instruments. I'd take my eyes off y'all for 2 seconds, and you're face planting your new ship into the moon." For once, Feldspar was embarrassed. "Well, we were doing instrument training, but, we got bored." She crossed her arms and stared at Feldspar in particular. Who got bored? "Okay, I got bored. In my defense, they're a quick learner." They gestured over to their apprentice. Ponder was still processing what just happened. Their legs were wobbling a little from the rush. "How are you doing there, Ponder? You a little shaken up?" Ponder held their helmet in both hands and looked at their reflection in the visor. I had my first crash, and I lived. Didn't even get a scratch." "Congratulations," Feldspar said cheerfully. "I want to go again. I think I know what I did wrong. You'll let me try again, right?" Feldspar squinted at him. Instructor mode kicked in again. Probably remember their promise to Hornfels. "Sure, everybody starts out rough, but I'm not letting you get more than 100 meters off the surface next time. No more leaving the Addle Rock until you give me 10 perfect landings." Ponder accepted it in stride. "I want to learn it right, sir. I'll give you 20. 10, Feldspar repeated. "Fuel don't grow on trees. Anyway, you're not getting anywhere until you fix the landing strut. Get the tools out the back and I'll show you what to do." Once they had the field repair kit and some spare parts arranged on the ground, they needed to get the ship propped up so that they would have room to work. "Normally, you'd have to use a jack, but we'll skip that step," Feldspar commented casually. "Huh?" Ponder looked up at the ship, wondering how they could lift up the nose without any tools.
Here, just slide this under something solid once it's up. I'll get the one on this side. Feldspar handed Ponder one of 2 metal supports. Honey, you mind getting this for me? They asked nicely, looking over to Charty. Sure. Chuck smiled happily through her sharp tusks. She put her hands under either side of the bubble of the cockpit. Her noodly arms seemed to grow thicker, but other than that, she didn't seem to be straining. She lifted up, and the whole ship moved. She tipped it back onto the other 2 landing struts. Ponder's mouth hung open. They looked up at the underside of the ship in shock. She made it look easy. She wasn't even careful to lift with her legs or anything. Her legs were probably tentacles, too, all the way down to her boots. The tentacles on the back of her head seemed to push off from the air, paradoxically getting some kind of leverage. Ponder almost forgot to put the support they were holding under the vessel to prop it up. The others moved on as if nothing much had happened. They were already looking at the damage. The structure of the landing gear was wooden, except for a flexible metal joint by the hull. Thankfully, that wasn't broken, only the timbers. They were meant to be the first thing to break, absorbing the force to save the more complex parts, and the occupants. Was she really that strong? Maybe it was just a low gravity. While no one was looking, Ponder put their arms under the forward fuselage. They flexed against it, testing the weight. Absolutely immovable.
What are you doing?
Chuck whispered. Ponder stood up straight and stepped back from the ship. They wiped some dust from their pants, not sure what to do with their arms. She giggled. Her laughter had an echo to it somehow. Thanks for the, Ponder trailed off awkwardly, gesturing to the whole ship lifting thing. The 2 Hearthians spent the afternoon sawing, sanding, and screwing wooden pieces into place. Once they were done, it didn't look exactly like it did before, but it would do the job. Afterwards, Feldspar went for a nap. The 2 young'uns sat on the porch and ate roasted nuts. It was quite peaceful, being surrounded by pine trees. The view of the sky was good, too. The scene could use some birds or crickets, though. Maybe a breeze. Out of the blue, Ponder asked, "Is it hard to see with just 2 eyes?" Charty's attention snapped over to Ponder. She furrowed her brow and opened her mouth. For a moment, she was too frustrated to speak. Ponder! I can't believe you! The blue Hearthian blinked at her dumbly, with 4 dumb eyes. Being dumb. Chuck turned away from him and crossed her arms. You're just like everybody else on Timber Hearth. Wait till I tell Feldspar you said that. Okay, is all Ponder said. They ate another roasted nut. Chuck waited. Nothing but chewing. All that work to paint extra eyes on her face, and they had the nerve to go and say something like that. After holding out almost a minute, Chuck glanced over at him again. Well, aren't you going to say you're sorry? They shrugged. I didn't do anything. I was just curious. Oh, yeah? Chuck shot back skeptically. Could it really be possible they weren't insulting her? She reached for a quick way to prove her point. Then come over here. Closer. Ponder got up out of their chair and stood in front of hers. Closer. They leaned over until the brim of their hats were touching. She grabbed Ponder's face with both hands and covered their bottom pair of eyes with her tentacle fingers. There. Can you still see? Ponder thought about it as if it was a real question. I guess I can see just fine. Might throw off my depth perception. I have depth perception, Chuck protested. You've got left and right depth perception, but not up and down, Ponder figured. Ever tilt your head to see better? No, Chuck stammered. It's not a bad thing. It's not? Then why were you making fun of me? As her frustration let up, she became more conscious of her position. Harthian eyes are big and empathetic on their own. Bringing them this close was starting to backfire on her. Gosh, even if Ponder was socially sensitive as a brick, they were always so open and genuine. Guess I was thinking about your eyes because I keep looking at them. They're so deep. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? She asked, her usual confidence wavering. I don't know. Maybe if I look at them a bit more, I'll find out. That's it. Chuck was completely flustered. She let go of their face and let him stand up straight. She pulled the brim of her hat down with one of the tentacles of her hair, hiding her face sheepishly. She let go of her hat and looked up just enough to peek out at him. What am I supposed to say to that? I don't know, Ponder said again. What do you think of mine? When I look at your eyes... After a moment of consideration, she decided to answer honestly. It looks like you're not afraid of me at all. And here I thought you were smart. Ponder smiled. I volunteered to strap myself to a controlled explosion and blast off from a perfectly good planet into the cold vacuum of space. I really must not be the brightest. That cheered her up for a moment, before she sighed again. Actually, you must be pretty smart to keep up with all that rocket science. The smart ones stay on the ground and make the spaceships. That's rocket science. We pilots just love the thrill and don't know what's good for us. Her smile turned into a grin. So you're crazy. Ponder didn't object. Imagine running into two people like that. Just my luck, she quipped with a measure of happy chagrin. Luck, she repeated softly to herself. She tilted her head at him curiously. Wait, did you just say that you're like Feldspar? You don't actually think you're as good as they are, do you? No, not yet. Pretty bad, really. Ponder chuckled at himself. But if it's a skill you can learn, and I keep learning, then I'll get there one day. In your dreams, she shot back. Clearly, no one could be as good as Dad to her. Maybe, they admitted with a smile. What about you? What do you dream about? I try not to. That came out a little more somber than she meant. Safe to say I won't be a pilot, that's all.